Hello and welcome to the Sana Psychological Podcast, your safe space for connection, healing, and growth. Each episode, our experienced clinicians and special guests will share strategies, stories, and resources to support your unique path to well-being. Because at Sana, your mental health matters. Hi, everyone. I'm Paige Abbott. Welcome to this episode of the Sana Psychological Podcast. Today, we are talking about one of my favorite topics when it comes to mental health and relationships, the topic of boundaries. It is a topic I've written over and over about on our blog that we've had for years. I talk about it with clients day after day after day, and it's something I love reading about, practicing. Just the world needs healthier boundaries. The interesting thing, though, about boundaries that I find is they are really misunderstood. And I think in our current era where we're at, the discussion about boundaries can tend to take on a very all or nothing cadence in discussion. And that's what I hope to challenge today, that boundaries are really the subtle work of improving relationships, including with ourselves. They're not always about estrangement or ghosting people or cutting people off or exiting relationships. Definitely this can be part of boundaries work, but when we think about boundaries, they do really exist on a spectrum. And that would be the more extreme end of the spectrum that really only becomes an option once there's been enough information to show us that we just can't continue to be part of that relationship anymore. At that point, we may feel that we need to exit out or back away from contact with that person. But there's also this whole other part of the continuum with boundaries where it can be more of the subtle work. As I said, I've written lots of blog posts about boundaries over the years, but one of my favorites and the classics that I keep coming back to and that clients and colleagues really seem to like is called Boundaries, an Inside Job. And in that blog at the beginning, I open up by saying that I hear clients often happily declaring that they have, quote unquote, set their boundary by telling somebody else what they need. For example, telling a friend to be on time because it's upsetting when they're late, or telling a spouse not to yell when they're angry, or telling a parent that their house is too triggering, so they need to remove all the sugar and the alcohol before they come over there, because that's something that they're navigating. While this may sound empowering, if it's about finding your voice and speaking up, it may be. But unfortunately, these are not examples of boundaries or boundary setting. They're actually examples of expectations, which in many ways are quite the opposite of boundaries. I go on to write that what I mean by that is that boundaries are an inside job. Boundaries are set by us for us. No one is responsible for following through on our boundaries but us. No friend, spouse, parent, colleague, or anyone else will ever be able to know or understand fully what works or does not work for you. You, however, will work on being attuned with yourself at any given moment and are therefore in the prized position of knowing what works and what doesn't at any given time. So with boundaries, we need to be aware of what works and doesn't work and be prepared to take action to follow through on that for ourselves. So for those examples listed above, you are the one that needs to be prepared to leave at a comfortable time if your friend is running late. You need to be the one to disengage from the conversation or even leave home if needed, if a spouse is yelling. And meet in a neutral, safe environment if a home or a space is triggering for you, rather than relying on others to read this or know this or live their lives differently. We can't make that demand of other people. If you are motivated to change and do something different, then do it. Don't let others hold you back. So this idea of boundaries, again, being an inside job, is the idea and the lived reality that we need to be aware of what our needs are, what our preferences are, what we're comfortable with and what we're not comfortable with, and ultimately be the one to take action on that. Now, I do know because I've had this conversation many times with people, that can be somewhat frustrating and disheartening. It feels a bit isolating, like you're on your own trying to navigate this world of boundaries within the relationship. And I'm not going to lie, there is truth to that to a certain extent. I guess when we look at personal growth and personal development, there's always this element of us being with ourselves. If that feels lonely or isolating to you, I think that's something important for you to explore because all of this work, including the boundaries work, is actually meant to help increase our feeling of connection with other people and actually also increase our feeling of connection with ourselves. So if that leaves you feeling isolated or alone or lonely, I actually then wonder maybe there's something within this practice happening that actually isn't about boundaries. Maybe you are in expectations or control territory and trying to force things to happen that may not be possible. Rather than looking at that boundaries side, which, yeah, it's action that you're taking for yourself, but ultimately helps you feel more comfortable, safe, and connected to yourself because you now know what you need and how to look after yourself, and also to other people. Because when you engage with them, you're doing so on your terms in your own way. So, we're going to continue talking about boundaries in terms of what are boundaries. So, boundaries are the limits that we set around what we are responsible for and what we're not. We can think of them as guidelines for how we allow others to treat us, how we protect our time, energy, and other resources, and how we maintain our emotional and physical well being. A helpful way to think about boundaries is that they are not about controlling other people. They are about navigating what you do with yourself and also in response to what's happening around you. So boundaries can also have that action component of we're identifying our needs, we're identifying our feelings, especially when our needs are not being met. And then there's that action or behavioral element. What are you prepared to do if your boundaries and your needs are not being met or not being respected? And that's where sometimes we can see some of those actions and behaviors start to pop up at that extreme end of the continuum or the far end of the continuum that I was mentioning a few moments ago. Because at that point, we may feel like we have no choice but to step away, whether it's just from a conversation or a situation, or ultimately, we may feel that we need to step away from a relationship, especially if the violation has been big enough and severe enough or repeated enough that we are realizing this isn't a safe place for me to be. Because boundaries have become such a popular topic online, I do feel that there is this continued element of confusion about them. It's easy to get caught in the really quick kind of carousel posts or one quick quote that we see online. And this is more likely that it will take us to that extreme space where we see that message that boundaries mean someone needs to respect that for us. If they're not, then we need to just leave them be, ghost them, get out of that relationship. So let's talk about a few common myths in addition to that come up from boundaries and the boundaries discussion online. So a myth that I've seen come up quite a bit is that boundaries are selfish. So many people are raised to believe that putting others first, always and in all situations, is what makes someone kind or loving. But constantly ignoring your own needs leads to resentment, burnout, and emotional exhaustion. Healthy boundaries actually allow you to show up more fully in your relationships because you're not constantly depleted. So, therefore, boundaries are not selfish. They actually create sustainability in our relationships. Another big myth, boundaries push people away. Some people worry if they start setting boundaries that they'll lose relationships. The truth is more nuanced than this. Boundaries may create distance in unhealthy dynamics, but they will create safety and stability in healthy ones. People who care about you might need some time to adjust if your behavior or what you're asking for is changing, but they usually learn how to respect your limits. If they can't, they were likely built on imbalance to begin with, and those relationships may not have been sustainable with or without the boundaries in place. You might as well take care of yourself along the way, right? Third myth, that boundaries always mean cutting people off. I've already talked about this a few times, and it was a myth that I directly wanted to address again because I do see it come up so often. And even in session, I hear people's resistance when I start to bring up the topic of boundaries, because this is often the myth that they vocalize that comes to mind. They don't want to lose their relationship, or they don't want to go no contact. Again, in reality, boundaries exist on a spectrum or a continuum. Some boundaries may be just small adjustments in communication, time, resources that we're giving. Others may involve more distance at certain times or when necessary. And at sort of the quieter end, which doesn't come up all the time, there may be that need for space or distance or no contact if a relationship has shown itself to be unsupportive of us, our boundaries, and providing that mutual respect. Most boundaries in everyday relationships are more simple, more day to day, with statements like, I'm not comfortable discussing that, or can we talk about that later when we're both feeling calm and we've both had a chance to think about this? I can't take that on right now. I need some time to think about it. These aren't dramatic. They're just practical ways of showing up and communicating and supporting ourselves. What do boundaries look like in relationships? This comes up as a question of intrigue for people a lot, because if boundaries aren't about telling other people how to treat us or what to do, or leaving a relationship if and going no contact, if it's not showing itself to be very respectful, then what are boundaries? What does this mean? And how are we engaging on these to a more everyday, kind of day-to-day level? Boundaries can show up in so many different ways. There can be time boundaries. So, this might look like protecting your schedule or your personal downtime. For example, I'm not available for calls after 9 p.m., or I need Sundays for myself to recharge. Without time boundaries, it's easy for people to unintentionally consume all of your availability. So, your boundaries are about being mindful of what kind of time you need for yourself, for other things in life, and what time you have to be able to devote to certain situations and relationships. Again, it's not about control, it's about awareness, and boundaries have a flexibility built within them where we are trying to get to know what the other person needs, as well as speaking up for what we need. There are emotional boundaries. So these involve recognizing what emotions belong to you and what emotions belong to somebody else. You can care about someone who is upset without taking responsibility for wanting to fix their feelings. An emotional boundary, if you were communicating about it, might sound like, I care about you. I can see that you're struggling. I can't solve this for you, but I'm here to listen. Or, I'm happy to listen, but I can't continue this conversation if I'm continuing to feel blamed. So these are different ways, depending on the context and what's happening, that we can just start to speak up about recognizing the emotional reality of ourselves as well as another person without needing to take that on. The emotional boundaries can also have a bit of the time boundary element. We may realize that now isn't the best time to communicate about something. It's okay to take a pause. It's okay to agree to come back at a later time and continue the conversation once you've both had a chance to calm down and get your thoughts and your feelings in a bit of a clearer place so that you can come back more respectfully. These are part of our communication boundaries. So these are about how, when, if conversations are going to happen. I'm open to discussing this, but not if we're yelling, can be one example if a conflict is getting really heated. If the conversation becomes respectful, I suggest that we take a break. I'm going to take a break for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe come back in an hour or two to pick up on this conversation. This protects the tone and the safety of our communication and allows our communication with others to actually be productive, not just result in conflict, blame, judgment, and emotions being thrown kind of back and forth and taking up the space rather than actually being able to calmly discuss. Physical boundaries are another great example of the way that boundaries can show up more subtly in our lives. This can involve personal space and physical comfort. So, examples can include sharing your preferences around personal touch with things like hugging or shaking hands or touch on shoulders with people that you connect with. It can look like please making a request of somebody to please ask before borrowing my things. But again, remembering that the ask is not the boundary. We're making a request. The boundary is informed by your feelings of discomfort when someone's taking what they are taking from you, the feelings of discomfort when they do, and then the action. What are you prepared to do if that person keeps taking your things without asking? You may have a few conversations with them. Again, you may shift some of the dynamics of the physicality of your things. You might move them, you might lock them up. You may take different action to preserve and protect what you need to. And ultimately, again, if these continue to be violated and disrespected, and you can come to that place of comfort of what you need while still engaging with that person, only then do we get to that point of considering stepping back from the relationship in part or in whole. So it may seem counterintuitive that boundaries can feel like they will weaken or make worse a relationship, but ultimately they do make relationships stronger. Why is that? I think a big part of it is that they help reduce resentment. And you may want to check out our previous episode on healing from resentment if this is an emotion that you've noticed has come up for yourself. It's a really common one that comes up when people haven't been aware of and implementing their own boundaries because now they're just feeling used, taken advantage of, disrespected, and that can build up a lot of feelings. It can also come from saying yes to everything while secretly being overwhelmed or uncomfortable, and then the resentment builds. But boundaries allow us to honestly be open with people about how we're feeling and where we want things to go and stop, hopefully, the resentment from growing in the first place or help to heal it as we start to really focus on our boundaries, our comfort zone, what's okay, what's not for us, which helps reduce future resentment from happening. Boundaries also create predictability. When people know your limits and you know your own, interactions become clearer. They have more of a regularity, a predictability, a cadence to them. Instead of guessing how you feel, people know what works for you and what doesn't. And this predictability creates a great sense of safety in relationships. It also allows you to show up openly, just give your all because you're doing it within the parameters that feel comfortable for you. Boundaries encourage mutual respect. Healthy relationships involve both people having their needs and limits met and respected. When you practice respecting your own boundaries, you're also more likely to respect others, and this creates that two-way respect, which deepens connection in relationships. Boundaries protect our individuality. Even in the closest of relationships, we still need interdependence. We still need to have a sense of self that's separate from the individual that we're connected with. Boundaries allow us to remain individuals rather than merging into unhealthy dependence or codependency. Paradoxically, that independence often makes relationships feel healthier, more connected, and more balanced because we can really appreciate that time spent with the other while also having that time for ourselves. I know that setting boundaries can feel really uncomfortable, especially if you were raised to avoid conflict or prioritize other people's comfort over your own. You might feel guilty, nervous, or really worried about how others will react. That's totally understandable, and that's a normal part of any change process. When we're moving from not doing something to moving into it, of course, there's going to be feelings that come. Our very first podcast episode was about fear and navigating through that with action. We want to do the same thing here with boundaries. Setting boundaries is a skill, and like with any skill, it becomes easier with practice. Remember that someone being disappointed by a boundary and an action that you're taking doesn't mean that the boundary was wrong. It just means that they had a different expectation. And the healthiest of relationships can support that because they support you. If a relationship doesn't support that, then it may not be the healthiest or the most functional relationship, not just in that way, but possibly in others as well. As we come to the end of our episode on boundaries, a big topic, this was really just an introduction to the idea of boundaries, and one that we will come back to again and again and again, directly as well as indirectly. But I want you to remember that boundaries are not walls that shut people out. They're guidelines that protect your well-being and clarify how relationships function. They help reduce resentment, improve communication, and allow relationships to grow in a healthier way. Most importantly, boundaries remind us that caring about others doesn't require abandoning ourselves. Healthy relationships are not built on unlimited access to us and our resources. They are built on mutual respect, honesty, and clear limits. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate every moment that you give to listening to our episodes. I would really appreciate also if you have a chance to like and subscribe to our podcast. We love having you here, and I want you to be notified about all of our upcoming episodes on various topics connected to mental health, relationships, and personal wellness. Thank you so much again. Take good care, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to the Sana Psychological Podcast. We're glad you joined us today. For more resources, free tools, or to book a session with our team, visit sanapsychological.com. Your mental health is our priority. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and take good care.